Today we're going to give you some insights about how to play ONUS. I'm Luis, one of the designers, and I'm going to explain to you the rules and the main mechanics used in the game. What you can see here is an example of the initial deployment of troops. The units are deployed face down, alternately, on a one-by-one basis until all the units are on the battlefield. Next, all the units are flipped over so that none of the players can create their strategy in advance depending on the opponent's deployment. Let's explain a bit about the unit's cards. In this specific example, we'll explain the traits of a Triari unit, which in addition includes a general in the unit and whose effects we will explain a little later. The traits of a unit are: first, the unit points, along with its faction's logo, red if it's Roman, blue if it's Carthaginian, and black if it's a mercenary unit. The name of the unit is written to the right of the logo, and below it both attacking values, the impact value and the value to inflict damage, the shot value and in brackets the maximum attacking range, defensive values to dodge blows and armor values, then the morale, life points, and the number of movement points. Each movement point is equal to a movement of 5 centimeters on the battlefield, roughly 2 inches, or to a 90-degree turn. Above this set of traits you can see the unit's skills. Blue skills represent units that need to be activated. For example, if we want to activate the phalanx, we have to place the appropriate token indicating that it is in that formation. The rest of the icons represent the unit's permanent skills. All these skills are described on a summary card with all the possible modifiers that may affect them. This is an example with just a few units of what might be a minor clash or skirmish, but depending on the number of points you want to play, the number of units could be much higher. First, let's explain how to activate the units. On the summary card, you have a reminder of all the phases that comprise a turn. Each turn, a player must complete an entire phase before passing on to the next one. At the end of your turn, you'll draw 1 new card if you played in order, or 3 new cards if you haven't played any. Afterwards, it will be your opponent's turn. In the first phase, activating units, we can use all the order cards from our hand that we wish. We have to keep in mind that the cards have a purple side with the orders to activate units or special actions, and an area of events that allows us to determine close combat or range attacks. In the first phase, we can only use orders, and in this example we can use Cavalry Advance, which allows us to activate all our cavalry units. But in this case, we only have 1. As an example, we can also use this other Probe card, which allows us to activate 2 units at once. In major combats, we recommend using these counters, which have an exclamation mark to indicate which units we activate, but in skirmishes as small as this one, they're not necessary. Once we have played all the order cards we want to, we can move our units in the movement and charge phase. In this case, thanks to the 2 orders played, one of them, a probe card, we can move a total of 3 units. Let's say that in this case we had the Roman Triari unit here, and we wanted to charge the Punic Phalanx unit. The Triari unit would move 2, that is, using the ruler included in the game, we could move 2 units. Apparently, we are out of range of the enemy unit, but we can make a 90-degree turn, which is equal to using a movement point. In this case, we move 1, and then we turn on the corner that most interests us, in this case, the top right corner. Maneuvering in this way, we make contact with the enemy, and they face off automatically. The section making partial contact, the front of the card has 4 frontal sections, perfectly aligns with the enemy. In this case, this unit has 2 free frontal sections, and the attacker chooses whether he wants to make a pincher movement on the enemy with those sections or not. Let's do that so that we can fight with 4 dice, 1 die per section, both for the attacker and the defender, who always play with the same dice. Now we're going to move the cavalry. We decide to widen the formation of this unit in order to have 6 frontal sections rather than 4. Stretching units has its pros and cons. The advantage is that we'll execute the attack frontally with 6 dice, and when the cavalry charges, it takes the initiative and hits first. The disadvantage is that we may receive attacks on the flanks, losing the token and receiving 1 damage hit automatically. Another inconvenience is that for each token added to the formation, our morale is reduced by 1. In this case, morale drops from 7 to 5 because we expanded the formation. In this case, since we have extended the formation, we can only make a reduced movement. That's to say, half its original value, or 3 movement points. We're going to turn, which uses 1 movement point, and we move forward another one. We could move 1 more point, but we choose not to use it. Finally, we're going to move the Roman archers, also with a reduced movement, since we want them to shoot their arrows, so we move them half the movement points. A reduced movement is also done when the movement is not frontal, for example when it's backwards, sideways, or diagonal, and the movement is half what the card indicates. This rule applies to all units except for skirmishers, like the Velites, which can make a complete movement in any direction. We approach using 1.5 movement points, which is half of 3, to attack the Libyan lancers. The archers have a range of 8, always calculated from the center of the frontal section. As we can see, we are at a distance of less than 4, half of the maximum range, so we will shoot with 4 dice instead of 2 because we are at close range. In the ranged attack phase, since the archers are at close range, 4 or fewer, we roll those 4 dice. We draw a random event, and we check whether it can be used with the attack. In this case, the card we drew is for close combat, so we discard it. Then the attacker has the option to play an event from his hand. In this case, he chooses not to do so. And the defender finally decides to use one, in this case, shelter. It looks like the Libyan lancers were ready for that attack, and they cover themselves with their shields, adding +2 to their defense values, both to dodge arrows and for their armor. Their defense value increases from 6 and 5 to 8 and 7. We calculate the shot. We have to use 2 attack points, and we would have to overcome that 8 defense value thanks to the bonus. Therefore, we would need a 7 on each die, which is impossible, but a 6 is always considered a hit, and a 1 always a miss. So we would have to get a 6 on each die to successfully hit the enemy unit. We rolled the 4 dice since we were at close range, and in this case we would have missed. Suppose we rolled a 6, hitting the target. Then with the same die we would have to roll again and try to surpass the Libyan's second defense value, which is a 7. 2 against 7, we would need another 6, but we miss. It seems the shelter event successfully protected the Libyans, making it almost impossible to inflict any damage on them. If we had been able to inflict some damage, we would have placed a damage token on the unit, which is double-sided. Whenever we receive damage, we have to check the morale. In this case, the morale is 6 minus 1 due to the damage received, thus dropping to a total of 5. And since its general is located less than 2 units away, that adds 1 point to the morale of the nearby units, and with that bonus point, it would have a morale of 6. So in this case, the roll is pointless because it will pass the morale check automatically. What would happen if the unit had 3 damage tokens on it? Its morale value would be 6 minus 3, plus a 1-point bonus thanks to the nearby general, for a total of 4, so we would have to roll a 4 or lower to pass the morale check. But if we rolled something higher than a 4, for example a 5, the unit would break up or become demoralized, and we would place this token on it. The unit would have a value of -1 to attack and for its morale. If it failed another morale check in the future, the unit would flee, and this token would represent that. After that, on every turn, this unit could move only in retreat until it either left the battlefield or recovered. Once the ranged attack phase is over, we keep going with the additional skirmishers movement. This type of unit, like the Velites, can move in any direction without any type of penalty for moving, and they can split their movement before and after the ranged attack phase. Let's imagine that we have activated the Velites. We can move, for instance, 3 units straight forward, even diagonally, throw javelins in the ranged attack phase, and afterwards move 1 backwards, since their movement trait is 4. After that, we would execute the combat phase, in which both the units that just entered combat and those that had already attacked in previous turns take part. We roll the dice, and we hit the enemy with all of them. Now we resolve the attack by checking if we penetrated their armor. The second value of the attack is a 6, 5 plus 1 for the nearby general, against a defensive value of 8 for the Carthaginian unit, so we need a 3 or higher in order to inflict damage. We roll the dice again, and we miss on 2 of the dice, so we damage the Carthaginian unit only twice. Since we have also played the Officer Casualties event, we place the appropriate token with the corresponding penalty. We carry out the Carthaginian attack on the Roman unit simultaneously, without applying any of the recent penalties. Their attack value is 4 plus 1 for the nearby general for a total of 5, and we attack the Triarii unit, which has a defensive value of 5 plus a 1 bonus for the general for a total of 6. 5 against 6 means we need at least a 2 on each die to surpass the Romans' defensive value. We roll the 4 dice, and we get a 1, which is always a miss, but in the case of this unit, which is marked with a star icon to indicate that it's a professional unit, we can re-roll the die that missed. We roll that die again, and this time it's also a hit. Now we roll the 4 dice that have hit again, and we compare the second attacking value with the second defensive unit of the Roman unit. The attacking unit has 4 plus 1 for the general versus an 8 plus 1 for the Roman general. That's a 5 against a 9. So to perforate the Romans' armor, the Carthaginians need to roll a 5. Since the Carthaginian unit has lost the combat because it received more damage than it inflicted, it now has to perform a morale check. Its morale is 8 plus 1, thanks to the general, for a total of 9. But since its commanding officer fell in combat, it also receives a penalty of -1, in addition to the wounds it received for another -2. The total is 1 plus 1 minus 1 minus 2, which equals 6. And because it is being attacked on the flank, it's penalized another -1 for an end result of 5. Therefore, to pass the morale check, the unit needs a 5 or less on a 6-sided die. We roll the die and get a 1, so the Carthaginians pass the morale check with flying colors. This combat has been fully resolved, and so we would keep going with the next one, if any. Now we're playing the last phase, called fleeing movements. If any units are fleeing, they have to pass a morale check. If they pass it, they can reorganize themselves. Otherwise, the unit must keep retreating at half the pace of its total movement. Let's explain another case in which it's the Carthaginian player's turn and he activates 2 units. The Punic phalanx that was already engaged in combat and the Libyan lancers. We move the Libyan lancers into position to attack the Triarii unit. We move forward 1 and we turn on this corner to make contact with the Romans. We automatically face the unit, and the section fits perfectly with the enemy. Moreover, since the Libyans have 3 free frontal sections, we can order a pincer movement against the enemy. 4 sections are making contact, so the combat is resolved with 4 dice. What's more, the Triarii unit is penalized -1 for being flanked, and minus another 2 for being attacked from the rear. That makes for a total of -3 to both the defensive and morale values. In addition, we have activated the Punic phalanx, and even though it doesn't have to be activated in order to do combat, we want to surround the Roman unit. We could do that with 2 of the frontal sections, although we only have room for 1 section since the Libyans are already there. The combat between these 2 units will be with 5 sections, that's to say with 5 dice. Since it's the Carthaginian player's turn, he decides the order of combat. Normally, we should begin with the most advantageous combat, where we also don't put our general's life in danger, so we attack the Triarii first with the Libyans. The Roman unit is penalized for 3 things: -1 for being flanked, -2 for being attacked from the rear, and -1 because a Carthaginian ally is also engaged in the combat. Therefore, the Triarii unit receives a total penalty of -4 to both its defensive and morale values. So the Libyan unit, with a value of 40 points, has a good chance of inflicting damage on the Triarii unit, which is worth 180 points, general included. Once we resolve this combat, we roll the dice to check the loser's morale. If it fails, the unit breaks up, and we then resolve the next combat: the Punic phalanx versus the Triarii, with the penalties that the Roman unit may have received from the previous combat. The Carthaginian unit has 5 sections in contact, so the 2 units both attack, but the Triarii are penalized -1 for being attacked on the flank, and another -1 because they're engaged with an additional enemy unit. Nonetheless, the Punic phalanx's defense would also be penalized -1 because it's being attacked on its flank, and another -1 because its commanding officer was lost in combat. As we complete each turn, we draw a new action card if we have played an order card from our hand. If we haven't played any, we draw 3 new cards. This is the way to refill your hand with the maximum number of cards to prepare the next turn. Unlike Hannibal's or Scipio's, the leadership value of a normal general is 6, in which case we can hold a maximum of 6 cards in our hand. If we had Hannibal, the maximum would be 8, and in the case of Scipio, 7, but we can never exceed those limits. If we ever hold more cards than permitted, we have to discard the ones we don't want to reach the limit set by our general's leadership value. So who wins a normal battle in ONUS? If, for instance, we're playing a game of 1,000 points on each side, when half of our army has been lost or is retreating, every time our turn begins, we have to pass a leadership check. To do that, we roll 2 dice, and we have to get the same value or less as the leadership value of our general. For example, in this case our general has a leadership value of 6. We roll 2 dice and we get exactly 6, so we can keep playing without any restrictions. If in subsequent turns more than half of our troops are dead or in retreat, we roll again for another leadership check. If we fail, or if our general is wounded or dead, then our army breaks up and withdraws from battle. There are optional rules to change the conditions of victory, such as ambushes, sieges, etc. The game includes many more advanced options, but in this video we wanted to give you a vision of the basic mechanics of the game and of the most common events during combat. And keep an eye out for the upcoming expansion with Greek and Persian units, and fortresses and terrains, when we'll be able to add battles with sieges, incendiary projectiles, battering rams, siege towers, and much more.